Hey, History 8 class, this is lecture number 1 of apparently a very long month of April. Today's April 1st, although I'm recording it on March 31st, but that's okay. So all that I'm going to do is just kind of do a quick little kind of summary of the things you've read. I'm going to go up through page 327 today, and then on Friday I'll go through 332. So if you want to have your book out, that's great. Maybe pause it, grab your book, because there are some pictures and stuff. I also printed off the slideshow, and I'll hold up some of those pictures so you can see them. Hopefully you can see them pretty well. I think they show up okay. So that's just kind of the plan of what's going to happen. I also am going to put in here somewhere a code word, so be listening for that, because you need to email me the code word so you get points for watching the video. All right, so this is the chapter on industrialism. By the way, hopefully you guys watched the video on the From History or His Story. And hopefully you also got to watch the little video I did this morning of the podcast. But his video was on the Industrial Revolution, and that kind of comes into this. This is a little bit later than that, but pretty close. Because the Industrial Revolution really takes off right after the Civil War in the United States. It happens earlier in Britain, like he talked about in the video, but it takes off right after the Civil War. So it's kind of perfect timing, which is why I said, hey, how about the Industrial Revolution? So, and this is the thing. In the early 19th century, which is the 1800s, remember, America's just kind of quiet. It had family farms, small villages. There were a few small cities on the Atlantic coast. Remember, the North had the factories. The South was very much farming. And so, you know, it's just kind of quiet. And then the Civil War happens and just things kind of change. Because of the Civil War, the North had started to really focus on factories and industrializing, and it caused a lot of change, especially at the end of the 1800s, which, by the way, I am looking at my books, and it is weird just to stare at a camera and myself the whole time, so I am kind of looking at my book and looking at pictures and stuff, so I'll hold those up, but yeah, I'm not ignoring you. It's weird. I don't know. Hopefully I'll get used to this at some point, because it'll be a while. Anyway, so first of all, we just have this boom, especially in the North, and so, but it also happens in the South. By the end of the century, there were crowded cities, busy factories, and even mechanized farms that kind of go across the country. So farms also start getting technology. And as technology and industry developed, the percentage of Americans that were living out on these farms or rural areas really declined. Most people still lived in rural areas, but the numbers that were living in these urban or city areas was steadily increasing. So first of all, America's population just like booms. In 1800, it had been less than 5.5 million people. Later, 70 years later, in 1870, the census showed that the population was almost 40 million. So we go up by like 29.5 million people. By 1910, it reached, what am I doing? Not 20, okay. 34.5. I don't know why I was thinking 11. I read 11 somewhere at the same time. Okay, so yeah, 34.5 million people it goes up by, and then by 1910 we reached 92 million people. So if you can imagine, it's huge. The birth rate was high, but the biggest reason that things were changing for America and we had so many people was the immigration. We just had so many people coming in from other countries. The land area of the United States was also growing. In 1800, I have a picture here, a map for you. There were only 16 states. Illinois wasn't even a state yet. If you could see this, I get it pretty close. Yeah, 16 states. It's a lot of territories. We own a lot of territories, but it's not a whole lot yet. But then, let's see, after we purchased Alaska in 1867, little growth occurs. Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and a few other small states were added in the last years of the 19th century, but really, we're pretty much done buying new land. And by 1900, there are 45 states, which you can kind of see here. Okay. You can see on this map that New Mexico, Arizona, and Oklahoma were just territories, and then so was Hawaii, and then Alaska and part of Oklahoma were just unorganized territories. So you can just kind of see the difference, which is huge. The country and its people were, we were just kind of a perfect country for industrialization. The United States was on its way to becoming one of the world's greatest industrial powers, and we do it fairly quickly. First of all, we had a free economy that gave businesses like the want to succeed because they were rewarded for it. In some other countries, especially later when we get to like communism and stuff, people aren't rewarded for their business and their ideas. And so, but in the United States they were. And so it was just wanting to get rich. And there were also some issues though. A lot of people thought that everyone should be equal, but the question is, should everyone have an equal amounts of money or just equal opportunity? So if everyone has the opportunity to get rich, it kind of makes a difference. So first of all, we had two big things that were working for us, and one of them is just the raw materials that we have, which we're going to get into, and labor force. I don't know if you can hear that. There's like a whole bunch of birds. So first of all, natural resources. The United States, because we're so vast and we have so much land in so many different places, we have a lot of natural resources. We have fertile soil and almost all of the raw materials needed for important things. And as we're growing, we're finding more minerals and stuff as well. Great Lodes, which is spelled L-O-D-E-S, which are deposits of gold, silver, and copper, were found in the Rocky Mountains, the far west, and Alaska, because we purchased Alaska here too. After the Civil War, thousands of miners and businessmen started streaming into the sparsely settled west, and that's when we really start to find things. And they were hoping to strike it rich. They found towns that have weird names like Eureka, Paradise, Coarse Gold, Slough House, Dinky Creek, and Whiskey Town, and they flourished briefly near these ore veins. And then when the ore is gone, they would just leave the cities. Occasionally, you'd have someone that would stay to earn money, but a lot of times they would just leave these cities. And I do have some pictures of just ghost towns. These are towns that like were built up, and then all of a sudden people leave, and they're just kind of left empty. This picture is not super great quality, but you can kind of see like there's a town there, and it just kind of is left empty. And you can actually, there are some ghost towns you can go visit in the West, and they're just kind of empty and plain. By the way, I hope you listen to the podcast today. It's all about people from the Wild West, which is pretty cool. Jesse James and all of those guys. All right, here's another part of a ghost town. You can just see like it even had a church, and just everything is just kind of left. I think I have one more. Yep, here is like a mill, or not a mill. I think it is. I don't know. This is just like a factory that they had used, and then they just kind of like abandon it. And some of these ghost towns look pretty creepy nowadays when you pull in and like there's nobody around. So another thing is just in the mountains, like in northern Minnesota, the Mesabi and the Cuyuna ranges. It provided raw materials for the growing iron and steel industry, which is huge. They also find petroleum resources, coal deposits, and of course water power. So those are all things to help. Another important resource was timber, trees. Obviously in the Northwest, we have huge amounts of lumber that they could use for business. Another thing is people. We're going to talk about a lot about immigrants, how they get here, that kind of thing. I also have a video I'm going to send you. So keep watching for that. So a nation's greatest resource is its people. First of all, we needed workers, and then as business keeps booming, we need more and more workers, so it encourages more people. And before 1880, most of our immigrants coming were from northwestern European countries like Britain, Ireland, Germany, even Scandinavia, and they would often use like freighters. They would carry passengers to the United States. Then on the way back, they would carry goods that we had made and sell those. It was not a good ride to the United States on these boats because it was cheap if you had a ticket down in the, what's called, I lost my word, in steerage. There we go. It's the noisiest, most crowded part of the ship. And they would just bring food with them in bundles to make it cheaper. The only thing is you have seasickness, you have disease. Think about like right now carrying diseases. That happened back then too. And so that would just make these voyages terrible. Some immigrants died on the way, but they still thought it was a better opportunity to come here from their homeland. Some actually were recruited to come here by companies that needed workers. There is a poem on page 323 of your book that I was going to read. It says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." It says this is an excerpt from The New Colossus, which is a poem by Emma Lazarus that is engraved on a plaque at the base of the Statue of Liberty. For modern Americans, the question, "What is your nationality?" can be difficult. If you think about, like, most people are not just from one area. Occasionally you do have those people that are like, "Oh, I'm all Dutch," or but a lot of people are from kind of everywhere. And America's had many different waves of immigration. We're going to talk about a couple of them today. The first came in the early 1700s when we have German and Scots-Irish that come into Pennsylvania. Then in the 19th century, we have 30 million Europeans coming into the United States. And then a lot of them were coming, though, from that Eastern European that I said. And then things shift. We were coming from Western Europe, and then things shift and they start coming from Eastern Europe. And this is when we have a lot of Jews in the early 1900s coming in as well. Then we have a third wave in the 1980s when actually we have a lot of Hispanic and Asian immigrants that come in. We also had a lot of refugees from Haiti and Cuba that come into places like New York City and Miami. And it's been like a huge source, like we've had great benefits, but also some problems. Some people feel threatened, but they also can bring great skills. And there are three things that ways Americans respond sometimes to immigration. And so one of them, it's just kind of negative reason or things that attitudes we have about immigrants. One is immigrants are going to take jobs from American citizens. Two is that American tax dollars will be spent to take care of jobless immigrants. And then three, immigrants will change our country. And I think they have changed our country, obviously, over the years. We're going to talk about one change with religion today. But, yeah. I do have a picture of the Statue of Liberty. It's got just kind of some measurements. It says the total weight is 450,000 pounds. The thickness of the copper covering is 3 and 32 inches. That's not right. Okay, so it's less. So if you put 2 pennies together, it's less than the thickness of that. So it is so. I think it's like 3:30 seconds. Anyway, this is like science math things happening here. So if you put 2 pennies together, like the coating on the Statue of Liberty, because I don't know if you know this, it's all like wiring inside, kind of like the Eiffel Tower. It's like that. It's built by the same person or designed by the same person. And so the covering on it is very, very thin. The thickness of her waist is 35. The tablet length is 23 and 7. The width is 13 and 7. From heel to top, she's 111 feet. The base to her torch is 151 feet. And foundation of the pedestal to the torch is 305. So I'll just kind of show you this picture. There's a lot of really cool detail. If you're ever like looking into, you want to learn more about the Statue of Liberty, there's a lot of cool things. Like if you look at closer pictures and stuff, just the details they included. Just like there's one part at the base where it has, there's like chains there, and it shows her like breaking free from those chains, like as she's walking away, or what it looks like she's walking away from them, and it's 1 foot forward, and they say that stands for us breaking free from slavery. Here is like the New York City skyline with the Statue of Liberty in the background, which is really cool too. All right, so now we're going to talk about Ellis Island. I think Ellis Island is super interesting. Okay, so I was trying to change my slide so I make sure I know where we're at. All right, so, well, let's finish with immigrants. So immigrants would choose to come over here. Companies would hire them. A lot of times they found that immigrants were just so desperate for work, they kind of didn't really care how much they were making, and they also weren't willing to join labor unions because they were too afraid to lose their job, because they were just trying to provide for their family and just really trying to improve their life. And so they just seemed to be really great workers. They would do their job because they're risking everything when they came here. Now, in order to get into the United States, you had to go through processing, and at this time it was done at Ellis Island. And it's in New York Harbor. So they would actually pull into this harbor. They would see the Statue of Liberty as they're coming in. And it was a temporary stopover for all incoming immigrants. And there was like a great hall, a dining room, and a hospital. Those who looked healthy enough to hold a job and who could prove that they had the means to reach distant destinations usually took a ferry to New Jersey and then rode a train inland. Others entered New York City totally like, what is happening? It's just kind of crazy. So when you get to Ellis Island, though, they had doctors that would check the immigrants. You had to be approved to come into the country. And if like your illness could be cured, they would actually keep you on the island, treated, and then sent as soon as possible. The Immigrant Center at Ellis Island opened or operated from 1892 to 1954. And they had more than 17 million immigrants come through on Ellis Island. The one-day record for the most that they processed was on April 17th of 1907. They had 11,747 people go through on that day. Most immigrants would only stay at Ellis Island for an average of 3 to 5 hours. I'm sure it felt like an eternity because they're just waiting to get approved to come in. About 20% of them did have some problems or questions that required them to stay overnight. I'm sure that would be so scary if you can imagine, like, you're coming to this new place, you're excited to kind of start a new life, and then you get stopped. So you can imagine that was probably really scary. But they were usually able to resolve them. Out of all of the millions who came, only 2% were denied entry, and that could be because of sickness. It could be also because of legal reasons. Maybe there was a legal issue and they can't come in. So a lot of immigrants would settle in neighborhoods of others from their nationality. That's why we have places like Chinatown in a lot of cities. If you go to like St. Louis, there is the Hill, which is a lot of Italian immigrants and just a lot of Italians living there. And so a lot of them would move to be by their others who know their language. In later years, after more immigrants had learned, after they had learned English and that kind of thing and saved money, they might move farther in. But a lot of them would stay in cities right along the coast when they first got here. Here are some pictures of Ellis Island. Sorry, some of these are not, they're pixelated pretty badly. So here's kind of them coming in. There are a couple pictures in your book on 324, too, if you're looking. I have this one, and Ellis Island, by the way, was later closed. They just felt like it wasn't needed as much. We just didn't have as many immigrants, and they were kind of, because of different transportation and stuff, they weren't all coming in through New York anyway. Now, things start to change, though. We start to get immigrants from other countries. In the 1840s, there was a potato blight in Ireland, and the thing about this disease is that in Ireland, they were so reliant on potatoes that when this happens, just people starve. It says that 1/8 of all Ireland's population starved to death or died from disease caused by malnutrition, and 3/8 of the population, 3 million, left Ireland. So you lose about half the population because of this. And so they actually really helped build a lot of our transportation systems like the Erie Canal. Then we have the Chinese. When we find out about gold, that kind of gets all over the world. Well, China is fairly close to California, and so people from, immigrants from China would come in California to try to find gold. And a lot of times the men would come first and then have their families come later. A lot of them worked in service like laundries and restaurants, and later they were actually hired to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. At first, like as long as jobs were available, Americans did not object to this, but later people started to object, and so politicians passed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and it reduced the legal Chinese immigration to a few hundred Chinese people per year. President Chester A. Arthur, who had assumed office after the assassination of James Garfield, which we're going to talk about at the very end today, vetoed the bill, but Congress overrode his veto. So unfortunately, they didn't listen to him. Okay, now Northern Europeans also came to America. We had political and religious unrest that was going through Germany during the 1840s. There was a lot of unrest in Germany for quite a long time. Revolutions failed, so people started leaving Europe, especially in 1848. People were landowners, and so they had enough money they could buy land when they got here, and so they settled in farming states like Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Others would work as lumberjacks. We also had Scandinavians, Norwegians, Swedes, and Finns who came, and a lot of them settled in Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. Some of them had newspapers that they started. They started their own colleges. A lot of them were Lutheran. Some had come to America to protest the policies of like their state church back home, and so that's part of that too. We are almost done, I promise. So then we have there is a change in the United States around this time that has to do with religion. Because remember, Protestantism had been here for a long time, and it had been kind of the majority of all people were Protestant. But after 1880, we just have this change. Because we kind of switch from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe to that Western part. I can't talk today. So we switch from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, and that brings about change. By 1920, I don't know why I can't do with the East-West thing today, I'm sorry. By 1920, America was religiously a different country because we had a lot of immigrants coming in that were Catholic, Jewish, Eastern Orthodox. Many Protestants were concerned about the increase of Catholicism and Catholics. Some Catholics, on the other hand, were worried their children were being taught the Protestant religion in public schools, which is going to come about later, trying to separate religion from schools. So a lot of actually these new, these people coming in would form schools for their children to teach like Catholicism, like Catholic schools and stuff, because they didn't want their kids in the public school. So it did show that maybe we needed to make changes because not everyone going to school was the same religion. America's increasing what's called a religious pluralism, which is a condition which where a variety of religious beliefs are accepted in a society, kind of fed the nation down the road of secularism, because we ended up getting rid of religion in schools and that kind of thing because not everybody agreed with it. So more people started reading their Bibles in private, but it was less of a public thing. Now, I did want to talk real quick about the death of Garfield, and I'm going to include a video today. By the way, your code word for the day, so you need to email me this word, is Garfield. Okay, so in order to get points for watching this video, because I'm going to just add some points in for watching the videos, you need to send me the word Garfield. You can just put it in the subject of the email. You don't even have to type anything, just put Garfield. Okay, so it says the assassination of President Garfield. It says in June of 1881, James Garfield had been in office for less than 4 months. It was super hot in Washington, and he wanted to get away to the New Jersey seashore for a break. So on July 2nd of 1881, he walked through the railway station in Washington to catch his train. Charles, and I should have looked up his name, Guiteau. It's not Gusteau. So an unsuccessful applicant for a government job stepped up to him and fired 2 shots from a revolver before being wrestled to the ground. One bullet grazed his arm, the other, though, lodged in his abdomen. The first doctors to arrive gave the president brandy and spirits of ammonia, which caused him to vomit, and probed the entry wound with their fingers in a metal probe. So, gross. They could not find the bullet, but they assumed it was somewhere stuck. The president, who was in great pain, complained of numbness in his legs and feet because the bullet was actually really near his spinal column. He was moved to the White House, and other doctors were consulted. 16 different doctors kept examining him, most of them probing the wound repeatedly with either their fingers or, remember, this was back then before like they knew all about germs and stuff, with unsterile instruments. So by the time he finally died of a heart attack on September 19th, the doctors had turned what was initially a 3-inch wound to a 20-inch long infected gash. If you can, it's gross. As they repeatedly searched for the elusive bullet. The person who shot him was arrested and tried. He was disgruntled because he wanted Garfield to appoint him as the ambassador to France, but he had been passed over, and that's why he shot him. In his trial, he claimed the president's doctors, not he, were actually responsible for his death. That's kind of partially true, I would say, but they wouldn't have been in there looking at things if it hadn't been for him. His argument carried no weight with the jury. He was found guilty, and he was hanged on June 30th, 1882, and then Chester A. Arthur became president. So that's just a little bit of information. I sent a video. I promise it's not gross. But anyway, don't forget your code word for the day is Garfield. Make sure you send that to me. And I hope you have a good day. I hope this wasn't too boring for you, and I hope I didn't talk too fast. Anyway, I will see you guys on Friday because I'll have another video of the next section. Have a good day. Bye.